I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords and find this new begoggled existence most enjoyable. To learn more, why not watch this informational video? Hi there everyone. No prizes for guessing what we're going to be talking about in this video. It's the new Avatar HD Goggles X from WalkSnow. In this video, I'm going to be going through all of the specs and features of these goggles on the bench. We're going to be looking at how these goggles compare to DJI HDZero and the original Avatar HD goggles. I'm going to be talking about the ergonomics of these and how they compare. And we're going to be looking at latency testing, not just of the Avatar system, but also the HDMI input as well. But more importantly than all of that, we're going to be asking a critical question, which is, where is Elon and how is he involved? It's a lot to cover in one video, so let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right into it. I want to kick things off by showing you what I think is the flagship feature of these new goggles from WalkSnow, which is a new video mode for the Avatar system, 1080p 100 frames per second. And this mode is available on all of the Avatar VTXs as far as I can tell, and it works with the new goggles, but as far as I'm aware, not with the original Avatar goggles. I've got beta firmware on my system right now, so we know that the image quality will improve as WalkSnow keep developing the system. But I want to show you some DVR footage from the goggles in 720p 100 frames per second mode and 1080p 100 frames per second mode, so that you can see what improvement in detail and resolution this new video mode can bring. I'm not sure how well this is going to come across. YouTube is obviously going to recompress the flight footage, and it's going to depend on what quality level you're watching this at. But to my mind, the 1080p 100 mode definitely has a small but significant advantage in terms of image quality and detail over the 720p 100 mode, and I think it's definitely worth having. That said, I'm not sure I understand why this is a Goggles X exclusive feature right now. The original Avatar goggles have 1080p 100Hz screens, and I think the chipset is similar between both. So it would be good to get some clarification from WalkSnow as to why it's not possible to backport the feature to the old goggles. Regardless of whether this 1080p 100 mode ends up being a Goggles X exclusive feature, the Goggles X has loads of other really nice upgrades over the original goggles. So let's head on over to the bench and let me talk you through all of these new features. Before we dive into the testing, I want to take a moment to give a big thank you to all of my patrons over on Patreon. Without their support, I wouldn't be able to make testing videos like this, and I wouldn't be able to get hold of test equipment like this. That's right, I am setting up for 5-inch battery testing. That's coming very, very soon. If you'd like to join us and support this test work going forward, then please check out the links in the video description to my Patreon. You can join from just a few dollars a month, and you'll get access to the entire back catalogue of all of the test data I've collected over the last couple of years, as well as access to special area of my Discord server and sneak peeks of things I'm working on. I'd really appreciate any support you can give. Alright, so let me take you through all of the features of these goggles on the bench, and I'll try not to miss any because there are a lot of them. On the top side of the goggles, we have 2 air vents, which is to allow air circulation to cool the electronics. We've got 2 antenna connectors, and these antenna connectors are standard RP SMA antennas. So if you want to use aftermarket Omni antennas or patches, you can unscrew these and screw on an aftermarket antenna. It's just an RP SMA connection. We've got on the right hand side the controls for the goggles, a 4-position joystick with a click, a back button, record button, and the bind button for connecting to the transmitter here. So these are all easy to access on the top of the goggles. If we turn the goggles over onto their side, on the right hand side you can see that we have the power connector. And Walks now provide this standard power connector for their goggles. So it's a barrel jack to an XT60. And the voltage range for these goggles is 7 to 26 volts. So that's from 2 to 6S LiPo battery voltage. And this is a wider voltage range than on the previous Avatar goggles, which only went up to 5S. So these goggles are rated up to 6S voltage. There's no power button on the goggles. So if you want to power the goggles on and off, you're going to be connecting and disconnecting the power cable or the battery. Looking at the bottom of the goggles, we have the focus and IPD adjustment like we had on the previous Avatar goggles, but there are some pretty big changes to the optics modules in these goggles. The IPD adjustment range is extended. So with the old goggles, you got 57 to 70 millimeters. With these new goggles, you get 54 to 74 millimeters. So it's got more adjustment range, both on the narrow end and the wide end, to be able to get those lenses in exactly the right position for your eyes. We've got 2 more antenna connections, again RPSMA, and then over here we've got all of the connections for the goggles. So we've got an HDMI input for an external module, we've got an AV input for something like a ground station, we've got an HDMI output, so you can broadcast what you're seeing on the screens over HDMI to an external device. We have an SD card slot, so that's for obviously doing your DVR recording and firmware updates, that sort of thing. If we look on the left-hand side of the goggles, we've just got another air vent here. But inside the goggles, again, we've got this new optic system that Walks now have. So first off, there's a proximity sensor in the bridge of the nose there to detect when the goggles are on or off your face. So you can turn the screens off automatically when you take off the goggles, which is a nice feature. We have, as I said, the new optics modules in here. So the field of view is increased from 46 degrees in the previous goggles to 50 degrees in these goggles. So we have a slightly wider field of view. We have replaceable lenses for astigmatism or people with very strong prescriptions or people who want blue light blocking lenses. So these lenses are replaceable in here. And the screens in the goggles are also 1080p 100 FPS screens. And Walks now go out of their way in the documentation to say that these goggles support 1080p 100 FPS, whereas the previous goggles don't. The final thing to talk about is the front panel on these goggles. And as you saw in the intro, these panels have LEDs behind them, so they glow different colors depending on what you're doing, which is a fun feature. But these panels are also removable and replaceable. And there are a few different options that Walks now talk about, like replacing these with patch antennas so you can get more range and penetration in a particular direction, or having a DIY sort of mounting for an external module that you might be able to fit instead of these panels. So it looks like Walks now kind of opening up what you can do with these front panels to more kind of DIY stuff, and that's nice to see. The goggles also have a gyro in them for head tracking, so that functionality is going to be available. And they also have a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth module for additional comms. Walks now say they're developing an app that's going to use this Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity for things like sharing DVR footage and also for finding your drone on a map when you crash. So I don't think this app is quite ready yet, but this is something that they're working on and they say is coming in the future that's going to use the functionality of this Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity. Looking at these new Avatar goggles, I think they have all the features that you'd expect from a new top-of-the-line goggle. And some of the stuff that Walks now are planning to do with the app that's coming is quite exciting. But the real comparison is against the best from DJI, HDZero and the old Avatar goggles. So let's take a look at all of these side by side and draw some comparisons. All right, so I've got all of these 4 goggles on the bench. We've got the DJI Goggles 2, the HDZero goggles, the Walks now Avatar Goggles X and the original Avatar goggles. And before we start, let's just take some weights and compare the weights of these goggles. So the original Avatar goggles come in at 340 grams. The Avatar Goggles X at 316 grams. So they've shaved about 25 grams on these new set. The HDZero Goggles 2 at 383, so a little bit heavier. And the DJI goggles at 298. So the DJI goggles come out as the lightest in terms of weight. The next area of comparison is ergonomics. So how do the Avatar Goggles X stack up to the DJI Goggles 2 and the HDZero goggles in terms of ergonomics? Well, we'll start with the Avatar Goggles X, And I'm going to put them on here. I'm just going to give you my thoughts on them. So first things first, this molded rubber face pad that they have is really well suited to my face. Walksnail are going to ship this with 2 pads, a narrow and a wide face pad. I've got the narrow one here and I get absolutely no light leakage around the side at all. It's completely dark in here and I don't have any uncomfortable pressure anywhere on my face. It's comfortable on my forehead, it's comfortable on my nose, it's comfortable on my cheekbones. It's really a fantastic fit. It's actually slightly better, I think, than any other goggle that I've ever worn. The headband that goes around the back of the goggles is just a little bit narrow for my taste. I would like it to be a little bit wider and softer, and it's also a little bit stiff. Now, that might loosen up as the elastic kind of ages a bit, but it's a little bit sort of stiff at the moment to get the right fit. In terms of the controls are really easy to find on the top of the goggles because they're very proud of the rest of the housing, and using the joystick is very easy and I know what direction I'm pushing the joystick in. And the other buttons are really easy to find, and back and record, it's super simple. Let's compare that now to the DJI Goggles 2. So with the DJI Goggles 2, first thing I notice is that no matter how I wear them, whether I sort of try and put them on the middle of my face or however I try and adjust it, I'm always getting some light leak from somewhere. So I can get light leak from down here, or if I move it a little bit, then I get light leak over here. So it's not a problem. It doesn't really affect my use of the goggles, but it's not quite as good as the Goggles X. Also, the fit is not quite as comfortable. There's a little bit more pressure for me on my forehead. I think that that's partly due to this light leak thing. There's a bit of pressure on the top here. In terms of the head strap, that's really nice. That's suitably flexible. It's quite comfy, so no problems there. And the controls, I know some people don't really like the little touchpad swipey thing that is on the Goggles 2. I really do like that little touchpad. I find it quite intuitive and easy to use, and actually a little bit easier perhaps than a multi-position joystick. But I know that on the Goggles Integra they got rid of that touchpad as well. So it's not for everyone, but I find it pretty easy to use. And overall, I would say that the Goggles 2 are not quite as good in terms of ergonomics as the Goggles X, just because that sort of feel on the face is not quite as good. It's not quite as comfortable. If we compare it to the HDZero goggles, we kind of cover this in the weights, but the HDZero goggles are quite a bit heavier than either the Goggles X or the Goggles 2. They do have a wonderful headband. This headband is by far the best. It's super wide, super soft, very flexible, and it's really comfy. The goggles do sort of press. You have to kind of get them in the right place on your face. There's a little bit more pressure just here on the top of the cheekbones. And if you just move them a little bit and get it wrong, you get some pressure on, I get some pressure on the bridge of my nose as well. It's not quite as comfortable as that kind of injection molded face pad. In terms of the controls, the little wheel with the click, I mean, the HDZero controls are for me the most intuitive and the easiest to use in the field. Because you've just got that wheel with the click button, you can find any menu item really quickly and select it. And you don't have that issue of like which way you're swiping or which way you're moving the joystick. So the controls I think are best on the HDZero goggles. But in terms of fit and comfort, I think overall for me personally and my face shape, which I know is like a more European face shape, definitely the Avatar Goggles X are doing a fantastic job in terms of ergonomics, and even perhaps just, a little bit of a step forward compared to the DJI Goggles 2, which is saying a lot because the DJI Goggles 2 are the goggles that I've found most comfortable up until now, and they're the ones that I use most. The final test I want to talk about is a latency test. We know from HDZero that the goggles can make a big difference to the total amount of latency on a system. So I wanted to test all the different modes of the new Avatar Goggles X and see how the latency compares to the previous version of the Avatar goggles. To do this, I used my 2 LED test, 1 LED in front of the FPV camera, 1 LED in the goggles, then both LEDs turn on together and a high-speed camera films the goggles to see how long it takes the light from the FPV camera to propagate through to the screen of the goggles. I've tiled up all the high-speed footage and synchronized it so that you can see how many frames it takes for the light to propagate through and how all the different modes compare to each other. I've counted the frames in the individual clips to create this chart, and this shows you the latency of the Goggles X in all the different modes. I can tell you that the new Goggles X has exactly the same latency as the old Avatar goggles in all of the modes that they share. So 720p 100, 1080 60 and 720p 60 in both 25 and 50 megabit mode are exactly the same in terms of latency between both sets of goggles. The new 1080p 100 mode on the Goggles X is slightly slower than 720p 100 by about 3 milliseconds or so. So you get about 27 milliseconds of latency in 1080p 100 mode at 50 megabits and about 29 milliseconds of latency at 25 megabits. Compare this to DJI 03, which is about 30 milliseconds. It is a small improvement, particularly if you're running in that 50 megabit mode. You get about 3 milliseconds improvement in latency compared to 03. Overall, I'd say that the improvement in detail that you get with the new 1080p 100 mode, if you're running at the 50 megabit setting, is definitely worth the small penalty in latency. I didn't really feel the difference in latency, but I did feel like I could see a lot more with the improvement in detail. So having looked at the test data, it's time for me to give you my conclusions on the WalkSnow Avatar Goggles X. Overall, I think they are a big upgrade on the original Avatar goggles. The ergonomics is much better with the molded face pad, the position of the buttons, and the fact that the goggles are slightly lighter all really contribute to making these, I think, the most comfortable goggles that I've ever worn. In terms of feature set, HDMI in, HDMI out, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi module, head tracker, a promised companion app, and the ability to swap out the faceplates on the front of the goggles to put in patch antennas and stuff. The feature set is really unrivaled. It's really impressive. If we're going to look for negatives, I can find two. No power button, and the headband is a little bit thin. I mean, you can replace the headband, and I've never used the power button on any of the goggles that I've owned, so they're just non-issues for me. Overall, I think that these are a really nice set of goggles, and it's going to come down to whether you want to use the Avatar system compared to HDZero or DJI. If you're going to want to use the Avatar system, then these are going to be the goggles that are going to be the right ones for you. And overall, I've always been really pleased with the Avatar system because it offers the most flexibility. You can use Avatar on micros, you can use it on full-size quads, you can record on board, so you can get DVR footage from even micro-sized quads that looks really, really good. It's got a race mode now, so it's not going to be as good for racing as HDZero, but it's got kind of this do-all ability that really DJI and HDZero kind of don't have at the moment. DJI is just for larger quads that fly, you know, freestyle and a little bit of sort of cinematic stuff. It's not suitable for racing. It's not suitable for micros. HDZero is obviously great for racing, but the DVR footage isn't so good on micros. Avatar does everything reasonably well. And so if you want just one set, one system, let's say you could only have one FPV system. If I could only have one FPV system, I would pick Avatar every day of the week, hands down, because I know I could do everything that I wanted to do in FPV with the Avatar system, and it would be absolutely fine. So if you're looking for kind of one video system to rule them all, Avatar is it. And if Avatar is the one for you, then the Goggles X are going to be the goggles that you're going to want to get. So I think that's the conclusion, really. It all comes down to, you know, your personal preferences. So let me know down in the comments what you think, whether you're excited about these new goggles, whether you're going to pick them up. I think they're $459 US. So the pricing is actually pretty good if you compare them to how much the HDZero and DJI goggles cost. The pricing is pretty good. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, hope you enjoyed the review, and that's all I have for you for today. So until next time, I wish you all very, very happy flying.